No one noticed her when she walked through the hospital halls. No rank, no uniform, just a quiet nurse with tired eyes and hands that never shook. But when a Navy SEAL was bleeding out in the dark, when helicopters couldn't land and time was already gone, she stepped forward and did what no one else could. In a place where rules fail and silence can kill, one forgotten woman crossed a line she swore she never would again. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. San Diego was uneasy that night. A cold Pacific wind swept through the harbor, dragging salt mist and the metallic scent of ship fuel inland. The waves struck the breakwater with unusual force, their dull thunder echoing between warehouses and low concrete buildings. It wasn't a storm, not yet, but the air carried the tension of one waiting to be born. Pacific Crest Medical Center stood a few blocks from the water, its emergency department glowing white against the dark coast. The hospital was used to military traffic, used to blood that didn't come from car accidents or kitchen knives, used to men and women who carried war quietly in their bodies. Inside Trauma Bay 3, the night shift moved with practiced efficiency. Claire Monroe stood near the wall, out of the way, exactly where she preferred to be. She was tall and lean, her posture straight without stiffness. Navy blue scrubs hung neatly from her frame, unwrinkled even halfway through a 12-hour shift. Her ash-brown hair was pulled back into a tight bun, not a strand out of place. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights, with sharp cheekbones and calm gray eyes that gave very little away. Claire had been working nights at Pacific Crest for almost 2 years, reliable, quiet, invisible. She spoke when necessary, listened more than she talked, and never involved herself in gossip or conflict. Some nurses found her distant. Others found her calming. No one knew where she went when her shift ended. No one knew what she'd been before she became Claire Monroe. Sarah Donnelly noticed more than most. Sarah was the charge nurse that night, a woman in her mid-40s with tired eyes and a steady voice. Years of emergency work had left their mark on her, faint lines at the corners of her mouth, shoulders slightly rounded from decades of leaning over patients. She was shorter than Claire, sturdily built, with auburn hair streaked with gray, usually tied back in a rushed ponytail. Sarah trusted experience. She trusted instinct. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she trusted Claire. "Harbor's rough tonight," Sarah said, glancing toward the ambulance bay doors as another gust rattled them. "Every time the ocean acts like this, we get trouble." Claire nodded once. "It's been that kind of shift." The alarm sounded at 11:47 p.m. Not the usual ambulance tone. This one was sharper, urgent in a way that made conversation die mid-sentence. The trauma bay doors burst open. A gurney came through fast, metal wheels screeching against the floor. 2 paramedics pushed it hard, their boots tracking seawater and sand across the linoleum. Rain clung to their jackets. The man on the stretcher was unconscious, strapped down, his chest rising unevenly. Blood soaked his tactical uniform. "Gunshot wound to the chest," one paramedic called out. "Possible shrapnel. Lost pressure en route. He's crashing." The smell of blood filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. Claire stepped closer without realizing she had moved. The patient was large, broad-shouldered, even in an injury. His face was angular, jaw shadowed with dark stubble, lips slightly parted as he struggled to breathe. A fresh scar crossed his cheekbone, still pink, the kind left by shrapnel or close combat. His hands twitched reflexively, fingers curling as if searching for something familiar. "Navy SEAL," the second paramedic added. "DevGru." Sarah's expression tightened. "Get Trauma 1 ready. Call thoracic. Now." The team swarmed the gurney. Gloves snapped on. Instruments were laid out. The cardiac monitor wailed as the patient's blood pressure dropped again. "Needle decompression," a young resident said, his voice tight. Too slow, Claire thought. She could see it clearly, the uneven chest rise, the tension beneath the skin. Air trapped where it shouldn't be, pressure building. The monitor flatlined for a fraction of a second. Claire moved. She stepped forward, hands already reaching, her movements controlled and deliberate. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. "Claire," Sarah said sharply. Claire didn't hear her. She cut cleanly, exactly where she needed to. Her fingers slid into the incision with practiced precision, finding the source of the problem by touch alone. The world narrowed. The noise faded. There was only anatomy, pressure, and time. She released the trapped air, adjusted, sealed. The response was immediate. The monitor steadied. The alarm softened into a regular, reassuring rhythm. Color returned faintly to the man's face. His breathing deepened, chest rising more evenly now. 30 seconds. The room went silent. The resident stared at Claire, disbelief written across his face. That's not... Sarah didn't finish her sentence. She was staring at Claire's hands. Claire pulled off her gloves slowly, blood streaking her fingers. For just a moment, she stared at them too, as if surprised by what they'd done. Then she wiped them clean, her expression carefully neutral. The patient was wheeled toward imaging. The trauma bay began to move again, voices returning, orders being given. But something had changed. Claire felt it before she saw it. Someone was watching her. She looked up. A man stood in the doorway, reins still clinging to the shoulders of his dark coat. He was tall, broad without being bulky, his posture rigid with military discipline. His hair was cut short, graying at the temples. His face was sharp and weathered, marked by a thin scar cutting through his right eyebrow. Commander Jack Rowe, former SEAL medic, Navy trauma liaison, a man who had seen too many field surgeries to be impressed by luck. His eyes were fixed on Claire, not shocked, recognizing. He stepped into the room, boots silent on the floor. "Who did that?" he asked. No one answered. Claire met his gaze briefly, then looked away as if uninterested. "I applied pressure," she said evenly. "Got lucky." Jack's mouth tightened slightly. "Lucky," he repeated. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You don't learn that in nursing school." Claire's eyes returned to his. Calm, guarded, measuring. Outside, the ocean struck the harbor again, louder this time, as if insisting on being heard. And somewhere beneath the name Claire Monroe, beneath the careful silence and controlled distance, something old stirred awake. The man survived the night. That fact alone changed the air inside Pacific Crest Medical Center. By dawn, the emergency department had settled into its usual post-crisis rhythm. Machines humming, floors scrubbed clean of blood and sand, staff moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen worse and expected to see it again. Outside, the wind had softened, though the ocean remained restless, rolling against the harbor walls with steady insistence. Claire Monroe finished her shift without incident. She charted vitals, checked IV lines, and assisted with routine transfers, her movements calm and deliberate. No one spoke directly about what had happened in Trauma Bay 3, but the glances followed her, brief, curious, unsettled. She felt them, the way one feels pressure changes before a storm. At 6:12 a.m., as the night staff began to trickle out, Sarah Donnelly intercepted her near the medication room. "You good?" Sarah asked, arms crossed. Her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. Claire nodded. "Just tired." Sarah studied her for a second longer than necessary. "Commander Rowe's still here?" Claire kept her expression neutral. "I'm off shift." "I know," Sarah said. "He asked for you by name." That was new. Claire removed her badge clip and slipped it into her pocket. "Tell him I'm a nurse, not a consultant." Sarah didn't move. "Claire," she said quietly, "whatever you did in there last night, it wasn't luck." Claire met her gaze. There was no anger in Sarah's eyes, only concern. That made it worse. "I'll talk to him," Claire said. 5 minutes. Commander Jack Rowe was waiting in a small conference room off the trauma wing. The lights were dimmer there, the walls lined with outdated medical posters and a whiteboard, still bearing last week's schedules. He stood when Claire entered. Up close, he looked older than she'd first thought, early 50s maybe. His face was lean, weathered by sun and long deployments, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes and mouth. His beard was neatly trimmed, but flecked with gray, giving him the look of a man who'd stopped caring about appearances long ago. And then, later, decided the discipline still mattered. "Thanks for coming," he said. Claire remained standing. "You asked for me." Jack nodded once. "I won't waste your time." He slid a tablet across the table. Claire didn't touch it. "I know who you are," Jack said. The words landed without drama. No accusation, no threat. Claire felt her pulse steady instead of spike. "You don't," she replied. "You saw a nurse do her job." Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. "I saw a battlefield chest decompression, performed cleanly, fast, and without hesitation. I've seen that exact movement maybe a dozen times in my life. All of them were overseas." He tapped the tablet. And I've seen it performed by one person better than anyone else. Claire's jaw tightened, just slightly. Jack watched her closely. Dr. Evelyn Hart. Silence filled the room. Outside, a gurney rattled past. Voices murmured, life continued. Inside, time slowed. That name doesn't exist, Claire said finally. Jack's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It does in a classified database that still gives me clearance headaches. Claire studied him now, really studied him. The scar through his eyebrow, the way he stood slightly angled toward the door, as if instinctively maintaining an escape route. The discipline that came from years of relying on his body to keep him alive. "What do you want?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back against the table and folded his arms. "The man you saved last night is Chief Petty Officer Mason Cole," he said. 38, DevGru, married, 1 kid. He shouldn't have made it to shore. Claire absorbed the information without comment. "He did," Jack continued, "because you stepped in, not because of hospital protocol, not because of equipment, because of you." "I was there," Claire said. "That's all." Jack shook his head. "No, you came back." That word, back, hung between them. Jack straightened. "I'm not here to expose you. If I wanted that, you wouldn't be standing in front of me. Then why are you here?" "Because something's changed," he said, "and because the Navy doesn't ignore people like you." Claire turned toward the window. The early morning light reflected off the harbor, dull silver beneath the clouds. For years, she had built her life around staying unnoticed, staying useful but not essential. "You should let me go," she said. "Whatever you think you recognize, it's in the past." Jack followed her gaze. "You disappear well," he said. "New name, clean license, quiet night shifts, but you never stopped watching, never stopped thinking like a surgeon." Claire said nothing. "There's a reason," Jack went on, "why you were at that hospital on that shift when a SEAL came in bleeding out. Some people call it coincidence. I don't." She turned back to him. "Careful," she said. "You're assigning meaning where there may be none." Jack smiled faintly. "That's not my habit." He picked up the tablet and slid it back toward her. This time, Claire took it. The screen showed a photo taken years ago. A medical tent, dust in the air, a woman in surgical scrubs, face partially obscured by a mask, eyes sharp and focused. Claire recognized herself instantly. "You were pronounced dead after Operation Black Currant," Jack said. "Officially lost in a secondary explosion. No body recovered. Case closed." Claire's fingers tightened around the tablet. "You know that's not how it happened," she said. "I know the report," Jack replied, "and I know reports are written by people with agendas." He paused. "Evelyn Hart was the best trauma surgeon I ever worked with. She didn't break under pressure, she didn't freeze, she didn't quit." Claire set the tablet down carefully. She learned what loyalty costs. Jack's expression shifted, something hard flickering behind his eyes. "So did I." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jack continued, his voice lower now. "Mason Cole woke up an hour ago. First thing he asked was who saved him." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "You didn't answer." "I said it was a nurse who knew what she was doing." She opened her eyes. "That's enough." "For now," Jack agreed. "But things have a way of surfacing." He hesitated, then added, "There's a debrief scheduled this afternoon. Not about you, about the mission. But your name came up." Claire laughed softly, without humor. "Of course it did." Jack watched her. "I'm offering you a choice, not an order." She waited. "You walk away," he said. "I forget what I saw." Or, "When the time comes, you help again, quietly, off the books." Claire shook her head. "I'm done with that world." Jack met her gaze steadily. "No," he said. "You're done running." The words landed closer to the truth than she liked. There was a knock at the door. A young Navy corpsman stepped in, barely 20. Dark-skinned, close-cropped hair, posture stiff with nerves. "Sir," he said to Jack, "Chief Cole's asking for you." Jack nodded. "Tell him I'll be there." The corpsman glanced at Claire, curiosity flickering across his face, then left. Jack turned back to her. "He remembers your hands," he said quietly. "That doesn't fade." Claire picked up her jacket. "Memory is unreliable. So is denial," Jack replied. She paused at the door. "If you come after me," she said, not turning around, "you'll regret it." Jack's voice was calm. "If I were coming after you, Evelyn, this conversation would have gone very differently." She left without another word. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting pale light across the harbor. Claire walked to her car, her steps steady, her breathing controlled. But beneath the calm, something had shifted. The past had seen her, and it wasn't done. Claire Monroe did not go home right away. She sat in her car in the hospital parking structure, engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, watching the pale morning light creep across the concrete levels. The night had drained out of her slowly, leaving behind a familiar ache behind her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that no amount of sleep ever truly fixed. Jack Rowe's words replayed themselves without permission. "You're done running." She had heard variations of that sentence before, from officers, from administrators, from people who believed endurance and obedience were the same thing. What they never understood was that disappearing had not been an act of fear. It had been an act of survival. Claire started the engine and drove south, away from the hospital, toward the quieter stretch of coastline, where the city thinned and the ocean became less decorative and more honest. The road curved along the cliffs, salt air seeping through the vents. She rolled the window down slightly, letting the wind sting her face, grounding herself in sensation. She parked near a fenced-off training field that overlooked the water. It was technically closed to civilians, but at this hour, no one bothered her. A handful of horses grazed beyond the fence, their silhouettes dark against the silver-blue ocean. They belonged to a private therapeutic riding program for veterans with spinal injuries and PTSD. Claire knew this because she volunteered there twice a month under a different name. One horse lifted its head as she approached the fence. He was a large bay gelding, at least 12 years old, with a broad chest and a scar running along his left flank, the pale line of old shrapnel damage from a transport accident years ago. His name was Atlas. He moved slowly, deliberately, favoring one hind leg when the air turned cold. Despite his size, he had gentle eyes and a patience that bordered on stubbornness. Veterans trusted him because he didn't spook easily. He had learned pain and didn't fear it. Claire rested her forearms on the fence. Atlas stepped closer, snorted softly, and lowered his head toward her hand. She scratched the space between his eyes, feeling the warmth beneath coarse hair. "You don't forget either," she murmured. Atlas exhaled, steady and calm. Behind her, boots crunched on gravel. Claire didn't turn immediately. She already knew who it was. Jack Rowe stopped a few feet away, giving her space. In daylight, he looked more worn than authoritative. His coat was gone, replaced by a plain navy jacket. The scar through his eyebrow caught the light, drawing attention to the crease that never fully relaxed. He looked like a man who had learned to stay alert even when resting. "You picked a strange place for reflection," he said. "It's quiet," Claire replied. "Most people don't come here unless they're broken." Jack glanced at Atlas. "Or healing." Claire finally turned to face him. "You followed me." "I followed the road," Jack said. "You happened to be on it." She didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. Jack leaned against the fence, careful not to crowd her. "Mason Cole asked about you again." Claire's jaw tightened. "You told him what you told me," Jack shook his head. "I told him you were a nurse who acted when no one else could. That's true." "It's incomplete." Claire studied the ocean beyond the cliffs. "So is every report." Jack's mouth twitched faintly. "You always hated paperwork." She almost smiled. Almost. "He remembers Afghanistan," Jack continued. "Not details, feelings, pressure, blood. He said your hands felt familiar, like he'd seen them before." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "Memory fills gaps with comfort." "Or truth," Jack said. A truck pulled into the lot behind them, matte black, government plates. Two men stepped out. The first was tall and narrow-shouldered, his movements precise, almost restrained. He wore civilian clothes that didn't quite disguise military posture. His hair was dark, cropped short, his face clean-shaven but sharp, cheekbones prominent, eyes calculating. He scanned the area before focusing on Claire. The second man was older, heavier, with a thick salt and pepper beard and hands that bore the quiet tremor of old injuries. He moved with the stiffness of someone whose joints had paid for every year of service. His eyes were kind but guarded, the eyes of a medic who had watched too many men bleed out despite doing everything right. Jack straightened slightly. "Didn't expect you two this early." The younger man approached first. Timing changed. He stopped a respectful distance from Claire. "Lieutenant Aaron Pike," he said. "Operations planning." Claire noted the lack of a handshake. Pike didn't offer unless he meant it. His gaze was direct but not aggressive, assessing rather than threatening. The older man nodded. Samuel Ortiz, Navy Medical Corps. Retired, technically. Ortiz's voice was warm, textured with a faint New Mexico accent. He looked at Claire with open curiosity, not suspicion. His beard was neatly trimmed, though his hair had gone fully gray, and the lines around his eyes spoke of long nights under poor lighting. Jack gestured between them. "This is Claire Monroe." Pike's eyes flicked briefly to Jack, then back to her. "For now." Claire didn't correct him. "We're not here to recruit," Ortiz said gently, sensing the tension, "or threaten. We're here because we've reached a point where pretending certain skills don't exist is no longer practical." Claire crossed her arms. "That usually means someone else is about to get hurt." Pike didn't deny it. A team was compromised last night during a maritime recon. No fatalities, but one operator sustained internal injuries that will worsen without intervention. Claire's expression remained neutral. "You have surgeons." "Yes," Ortiz said, "but not where the team is, and not without creating visibility that puts everyone at risk." Jack watched Claire carefully. "This isn't an order." "No," Pike agreed. "It's an option." Claire let out a slow breath. "You came prepared." "We learned," Pike said, "from last time." That word again. Claire looked back at Atlas. The horse had stepped away slightly, giving her room, but his attention never left her. He shifted his weight, patient, waiting. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. "Das Sigidisikt?" Pike answered first. "We adjust. We lose time. Someone may survive anyway." "And if I say yes?" Ortiz met her gaze. "Then someone definitely does." Silence stretched. Claire thought of the hospital corridors she walked every night, of Sarah's quiet trust, of the way her hands had moved without hesitation when the monitor flatlined. She thought of the years she had spent convincing herself that distance was the same as peace. Jack spoke softly. "You don't have to decide now." Claire nodded. "Good." She pushed off the fence and walked toward her car. Jack fell into step beside her, keeping pace. "They won't stop asking," he said. "I know." "And you won't stop seeing it," Jack added. "The injuries, the gaps, the things no one else notices." Claire opened her car door. "That doesn't mean I belong back there." Jack rested a hand on the roof, steady. "It means you never really left." She looked at him then, really looked, at the lines carved by responsibility, at the restraint he carried like armor. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. Jack's gaze flickered. "A man died because I hesitated." Claire nodded once. "That stays with you." "Yes," he said. "It does." She got into the car and shut the door. The engine started smoothly, familiar and grounding. Before pulling away, she rolled the window down. "Tell Mason Cole," she said, "that the nurse who saved him hopes he heals well." Jack smiled faintly. "I'll tell him." As Claire drove off, the ocean stretched wide and unyielding beside her. The quiet between missions, she knew, never lasted long. Claire Monroe agreed to nothing. That was how she framed it in her own mind as she drove home along the coast, the ocean pacing her on the left like a patient predator. She did not agree to return. She did not agree to rejoin anything. She only agreed to listen. Listening, after all, had never ruined anyone's life. Action had. Her apartment sat above a quiet marina on the southern edge of the city, a narrow building that smelled faintly of salt and old wood. Inside, everything was minimal. Clean countertops, a single couch, one frame photograph turned face down on a shelf. Claire showered, dressed, and tried to sleep. But the silence pressed too hard. Her mind replayed images she hadn't summoned in years. Dim lights, blood-slick gloves, voices counting time in seconds instead of minutes. Her phone vibrated just after noon. Jack Rowe's name appeared. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. "You said no pressure." "I did," Jack replied. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it now. Urgency, carefully controlled. "This isn't pressure, this is information." She closed her eyes. "Go on." "The injured operator is stable for now," Jack said, "but he's bleeding internally. We bought time. We didn't fix the problem." Claire sat on the edge of the bed. "You have surgeons." "Not within 6 hours of where he is," Jack said, "and not without compromising the extraction team." She was quiet. "He's 32, Jack continued. "Name's Luke Brennan. He's the kind of guy who volunteers for point without being asked." Claire pictured him without meaning to. Broad shoulders, quiet confidence. Men like that always had a certain stillness about them, like coiled wire. Jack lowered his voice. He has a dog. That made her open her eyes. Belgian Malinois, Jack added. 3 years old. Name's Echo. Won't leave his side. Claire exhaled slowly. That's not fair. Jack didn't apologize. It's true. An hour later, Claire stood on the deck of a small naval medical transport, the coastline shrinking behind them as the vessel cut south through open water. She wore civilian clothes layered beneath a borrowed jacket, hair pulled back, face bare of expression. This was not a deployment. It was a favor. That distinction mattered to her. The transport was quiet, crewed by a handful of medics and operators who moved with efficient restraint. No one stared. No one asked questions. Word traveled fast in tight circles. Luke Brennan lay below deck in a makeshift treatment area, strapped to a narrow cot bolted to the floor. He was conscious, pale, jaw clenched against pain. He had the build of someone used to carrying weight. Tall, muscular, without excess, his arms crisscrossed with old scars. His beard was uneven, grown out during the mission, giving his angular face a rough edge. His eyes were sharp despite the pain, tracking every movement in the room. At his side lay Echo. The dog was all muscle and alertness, tan coat short and glossy, black mask sharp against intelligent amber eyes. He lay pressed close to Luke's hip, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. When Claire approached, Echo lifted his head, assessing her carefully. Not aggressive, protective. Luke noticed her glance. He won't bite, he said hoarsely, unless you give him a reason. Claire knelt slowly, keeping her movements deliberate. She let Echo sniff the back of her hand before touching Luke's side. I'm Claire, she said. Luke studied her face. You the nurse they flew in? Yes, she replied. It wasn't a lie. She examined him with practiced calm, fingers pressing gently along his abdomen, reading the subtle language of pain and tension. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't pull away. Internal bleed, she said. Slow, but worsening. Luke swallowed. Can you fix it? Claire hesitated. I can stop it. Jack stood near the bulkhead, arms crossed, watching her closely. He said nothing. The procedure was crude compared to an operating room. Limited instruments, unstable footing. The ocean rolled beneath them, a constant reminder of how thin control really was. Claire worked carefully, methodically, her focus narrowing until nothing existed beyond her hands and the problem in front of them. Echo did not move. The dog remained pressed against Luke's leg, eyes never leaving Claire, muscles taut but trusting. When Luke's breathing grew ragged, Echo nudged him with his nose, grounding him. Claire noticed. She always noticed. It took 40 minutes. When she finished, Luke lay back, sweat beading on his forehead, color slowly returning to his face. The bleeding had stopped, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. You're going to live, Claire told him. Luke let out a shaky breath. Knew it. She straightened, removing her gloves. Echo rose, stretched, and then did something unexpected. He stepped closer to Claire and pressed his head briefly against her thigh. She froze. Luke smiled faintly. That's his thank you. Claire swallowed hard. You trained him well. Luke's expression softened. He trained me. The transport docked just after sunset. Luke was transferred to a secure facility where a surgical team waited to finish what Claire had started. As she prepared to leave, Luke caught her wrist gently. You didn't have to come, he said. Claire met his gaze. I know. Jack walked her back onto the deck. The wind had picked up again, salt spray catching in her hair. You crossed the line, he said quietly. She didn't deny it. I stepped back over it. Jack nodded once. That's all anyone can ever do. As the transport turned back toward the city, Claire watched the horizon darken. She felt no triumph, no relief, only the familiar weight of responsibility settling back into place. She had told herself she was done, but some lines, once crossed, never fully release you. Claire felt it before anyone said a word. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a tightening, subtle but persistent, like a muscle that had been braced too long and refused to relax. The kind of awareness that came from years of knowing when a room was no longer safe, when attention shifted from background noise to something sharper. Pacific Crest Medical Center looked the same when she returned 2 days later. The glass doors slid open with their usual sigh. The smell of antiseptic and old coffee clung to the air. Stretchers moved through hallways. Phones rang. Life continued with practiced indifference. But Claire knew better. She moved through the corridors in her navy scrubs, posture straight, expression neutral. Her steps were unhurried, her gaze forward. On the surface, she was the same quiet night nurse everyone expected. Underneath, she cataloged details without effort. The way conversations dipped when she passed. The way two residents paused mid-sentence near the trauma, bored. The way security lingered a fraction longer at the desk. She had been seen. Sarah Donnelly caught up to her near the supply room. Sarah looked more tired than usual, dark circles deepening beneath her eyes. She carried herself with the same sturdy confidence, but there was tension in her jaw now, a stiffness that suggested she'd already dealt with something she didn't like. "Claire," she said, keeping her voice light. "You got a minute?" Claire nodded. "Sure." Inside the supply room, surrounded by neatly stacked boxes and the faint hum of refrigeration units, Sarah crossed her arms. "You didn't tell me you were consulting for the Navy," she said. Claire met her gaze calmly. "I'm not." Sarah studied her, then sighed. "Commander Rowe was here again this morning. Administration noticed." "That happens," Claire replied. "Not like this." Sarah hesitated. "They asked about your credentials." Claire felt the tightening deepen. "And?" "I told them what's on file," Sarah said. "That you're licensed, competent, and one of the best nurses I've worked with." Claire inclined her head slightly. "Thank you." Sarah didn't smile. "That's not what worries me." "What does?" Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "People with uniforms don't come back for no reason, and administrators don't ask questions unless they're being pushed." Claire said nothing. "I don't need to know your past," Sarah continued, "but I need to know if you're safe here." Claire considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. The simple one was easier. "For now," she said. Sarah searched her face, then nodded once. "If that changes, you tell me." Claire promised nothing. She left the supply room and resumed her rounds. By mid-afternoon, the call came. Jack Rowe didn't use his phone this time. He met her instead, just outside the hospital, where the concrete gave way to a narrow strip of landscaping and the distant sound of traffic. He looked tense, more than usual. "You made ripples," he said without preamble. Claire folded her arms. "Luke's alive." "Yes," Jack agreed. "Because of you." That was the point. Jack exhaled slowly. "It was also noticed." She didn't interrupt. "Someone filed a formal inquiry," Jack continued. "Not criminal, not yet, but administrative. They want to know why a civilian nurse was present on a classified transport." Claire's jaw tightened. "I wasn't present. I assisted." Jack grimaced. "They don't care about semantics." "Who filed it?" Jack hesitated. "Rear Command? Medical oversight?" That was worse than she'd hoped. "They'll dig," Claire said. "Not deep, but enough." Jack nodded. "That's why I'm here." They walked along the edge of the lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Jack stopped near a low concrete wall and rested, his hands against it, shoulders squared. "There's a way to contain this," he said. Claire raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "You come in," Jack said. "Temporarily, officially, under supervision." Claire laughed softly, without humor. "No." Jack met her eyes. "You knew this would happen." "I knew it might, and you did it anyway." Claire didn't deny it. "Someone needed help." Jack's voice softened. "And you answered. That's not something you unlearn." A man approached them from the far end of the lot. He was older than Jack, late 50s at least, with a thick build and the bearing of someone who'd once been formidable and still carried that memory in his bones. His hair was cut short, completely gray, and his beard was full and carefully maintained, framing a face marked by deep lines and a permanent scowl. His left hand was stiff, fingers slightly curled inward, the legacy of an injury that had ended his field career. "Commander," he said to Jack. His voice was gravelly, authoritative. Jack straightened. "Captain Hayes?" Captain Robert Hayes turned his attention to Claire. His gaze was direct, assessing, but not unkind. He looked like a man who had learned to distrust first impressions because they were usually wrong. "So, you're the problem," Hayes said. Claire met his stare evenly. "Depends who you ask." The corner of Hayes's mouth twitched. "Fair." He folded his arms. "I've read your file, the one that still exists." Claire said nothing. You were very good, Hayes continued. Too good, according to some people. Jack stiffened slightly. Sir, Hayes raised a hand. Relax. If I wanted this to go differently, it already would have. He turned back to Claire. You saved Brennan. You saved Cole. That buys you goodwill. It doesn't buy you invisibility. Claire nodded. I'm not asking for either. Hayes studied her for a long moment. What are you asking for? She answered honestly. To be left alone. Hayes sighed. That's not how this works. No, Claire agreed. It never is. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Hayes finally spoke again. There's a unit rotating back stateside next month. Medical integration program, low visibility, teaching role. Claire shook her head immediately. I'm not interested. Hayes didn't push. You will be. She looked at him sharply. Why? Because you don't belong on the sidelines, Hayes said, and because the people who trained you are running out of time. Jack watched her closely, concern etched into his face. Claire felt the weight settle fully now. Not panic, not anger, responsibility, the kind that didn't care whether you accepted it or not. I need time, she said. Hayes nodded. You have a little, not much. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, he added, I lost a good medic because of bureaucracy. I won't lose another because of fear. With that, he walked away. Jack remained silent. This is what it costs, he said finally, being seen. Claire looked back at the hospital, at the place she had chosen for its anonymity, its safety. I know, she said. That night, she returned to the riding field. Atlas was there, grazing slowly beneath the fading light. When he saw her, he lifted his head and huffed softly, recognizing her presence. She leaned against the fence again, the familiar posture easing something tight in her chest. You always pay eventually, she murmured. Atlas stepped closer, resting his muzzles against the fence, solid, unmoving. Claire closed her eyes. She had stepped back over the line, and now the cost was coming due. The call came at 2:18 a.m. Claire Monroe was awake when her phone vibrated on the nightstand. She had learned long ago not to trust silence. Silence was only the space between events, never the absence of them. She reached for the phone without hesitation, already bracing herself. Jack Rowe's voice was low, controlled. We're out of time. Claire sat up, feet finding the floor. Tell me what happened. Not over the phone, Jack said, but you need to come, now. 20 minutes later, she was driving north along the coastal highway. The road nearly empty, the ocean a dark, shifting mass beside her. The city lights faded behind her, replaced by the distant glow of naval installations that never truly slept. She felt calm in the way one does before impact, when decisions have already been made by circumstances larger than will. The temporary operations center sat on the edge of an old airfield, its hangars repurposed for logistics and triage. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and jet fuel. Claire was escorted through security without comment. Faces she didn't recognize nodded as she passed, respectful but wary. Jack met her near the briefing room. He looked tired, more so than she had ever seen him, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders carrying weight that wasn't physical. They went in to extract an asset, he said as they walked. Local contact. Things went sideways. Claire didn't interrupt. One operator took a blast, Jack continued. Shrapnel to the lower thorax. We stabilized him in the field. Barely. They entered the room. On the table lay the injured man. His name was Ethan Morales. He was in his mid-30s, lean and compact, built for speed rather than force. His skin was olive-toned, his dark hair cropped short, his beard neatly trimmed despite the circumstances. A jagged scar ran from his left ear down toward his jaw, an old injury that had healed badly, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, faint downturn. He looked older than his age, the kind of man whose face had learned to hold tension even at rest. Ethan's eyes were open. They tracked Claire as she approached, sharp and alert, despite the pain medication. There was no panic in them, only assessment. You're the one, he said quietly. Claire placed her bag down and began examining him, hands steady, voice even. I'm here to help. He nodded once. Good. She worked quickly, efficiently, reading his injuries by touch and response rather than relying solely on monitors. Shrapnel had torn through muscle and nicked something deeper. The bleeding was controlled, but not resolved. Infection risk was rising. Time was the enemy now. You need surgery, Claire said. Soon. Ethan exhaled slowly. We can't move. Jack stepped closer. Extraction window collapsed, airspace compromised. Claire straightened. Then we operate here. The room went quiet. A man standing near the far wall cleared his throat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a heavy beard and a shaved head. His arms were crossed over a chest marked by faded unit tattoos. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and they studied Claire with open skepticism. That's not a hospital, he said. Jack glanced at him. This is Chief Warrant Officer Ben Carter, team lead. Claire met Carter's gaze. I know where I am. Carter didn't smile. Do you know what happens if this goes wrong? Claire's voice was level. Yes. Carter studied her for a long moment. Then you're braver than most. Or more honest, she replied. Jack intervened. We don't have another option. Carter nodded once. Then do it. The makeshift operating area was assembled in minutes. Equipment was limited. Lighting was harsh and uneven. The hum of generators filled the space. Claire scrubbed in, her movements precise, familiar. It felt wrong and right at the same time, like slipping back into a role she had never truly left. Ethan watched her as she prepared. You don't look nervous, he said. Claire glanced at him. I am. He almost smiled. Good. Means you're paying attention. She made the first incision. The work was slower than she wanted, constrained by tools and space, but her focus was absolute. She isolated the damaged tissue, removed fragments with careful patience, controlled the bleed. Sweat gathered at her temples. Her shoulders ached. She ignored both. Outside the immediate circle of light, Carter stood watch, his presence solid, unmoving. Years earlier, a miscalculation on his part had cost him a man. Since then, he trusted action more than plans, competence more than rank. He watched Claire work with the intensity of someone measuring risk, second by second. An hour passed, then another. Claire closed the incision and stepped back. Her hands trembled now, just slightly, the adrenaline ebbing. It's done, she said. Ethan's breathing had steadied. Color returned to his face. The monitors showed improvement. Not perfect, but enough. Carter exhaled, tension releasing from his frame. He stepped closer, voice low. You saved him. Claire removed her gloves. He'll need proper surgery later. This buys time. That's all we needed, Carter said. Jack watched her carefully. You crossed another line tonight. Claire met his gaze. I know. Carter studied her, then extended his hand. I was wrong, he said simply. Claire shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. As dawn crept across the horizon, the team began preparations to move Ethan when conditions allowed. Claire packed her bag, fatigue settling deep into her bones. Jack walked her toward the exit. Command will push harder now. Claire nodded. They always do. You could formalize this, Jack said. Protect yourself. She stopped. Or I could lose what little control I have left. Jack didn't argue. He had learned when not to. Outside, the sky lightened, the first hint of morning cutting through the darkness. Claire stood for a moment, breathing in the cool air, grounding herself. She had been needed. She had answered. That was the truth she could no longer avoid. Exposure never arrived like an explosion. It came quietly, the way rot does, slow, unnoticed at first, spreading beneath the surface until something finally collapsed under its own weight. Claire Monroe sensed it the moment she stepped back into Pacific Crest Medical Center. Nothing was overt, no alarms, no confrontation. But the rhythm was off. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. A resident glanced at her twice before looking away. Security stood closer to the nurse's station than usual, posture casual, but eyes alert. She had crossed too many lines too quickly. Sarah Donnelly found her near the charting desk. Sarah's face was carefully neutral, but the tension in her shoulders gave her away. Administration wants to see you, she said. Now. Claire nodded once. Who specifically? Risk management, legal, and someone from the Navy. That narrowed it down. The conference room on the third floor had no windows. The air smelled faintly of recycled ventilation and stale coffee. A long table dominated the center, polished to a dull sheen that reflected overhead lights without warmth. 3 people waited. The first was Linda Carver, hospital legal counsel. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, silver blonde hair cut just below the jawline. Her posture was rigid, hands folded neatly atop a leather folder. She had the composed expression of someone who measured consequences for a living and rarely liked what she found. Beside her sat Dr. Michael Trent, Chief Medical Officer. Tall, thin, with a narrow face and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. His hairline had receded early, leaving his forehead exposed and perpetually furrowed. He avoided eye contact, a man more comfortable with systems than people. The third man stood near the wall. Claire recognized him immediately. Captain Robert Hayes. Out of uniform now, wearing a plain dark suit that did nothing to soften his presence. His thick gray beard had been trimmed shorter, emphasizing the hard lines of his jaw. His injured hand rested loosely at his side, fingers still curled. He looked like a man forced into civilian clothes against his will. "Have a seat," Linda Carver said. Claire sat. Linda opened her folder. "We've received a formal inquiry regarding your involvement in a classified military medical operation." Claire kept her expression neutral. "I assisted in an emergency." "That emergency occurred off hospital grounds," Linda said, "on a Navy transport, without formal clearance." Dr. Trent cleared his throat. "This puts the hospital in a difficult position." Claire looked at him. "I didn't act as a representative of Pacific Crest." "That distinction may not hold," Linda replied. Captain Hayes stepped forward slightly. "This isn't about the hospital." Linda's lips tightened. "With respect, Captain, it absolutely is." Hayes ignored her and looked directly at Claire. "Command wants clarity." Claire met his gaze. "About what?" "About whether you intend to keep operating in the shadows," Hayes said, "or whether you are prepared to step forward." Silence settled heavy over the room. Claire leaned back in her chair. "And if I don't," Hayes's voice was calm but firm, "then others will decide for you." Dr. Trent finally spoke, his voice strained. "Claire, we value your work here, but your background creates liability." "There it is," Claire said quietly. Linda bristled. "This is not personal." Claire smiled faintly. "It never is." Hayes exhaled. "You saved 3 operators in under a week. One of them would be dead without you. That kind of outcome attracts attention." Claire's jaw tightened. "That's the problem with doing your job well." Hayes studied her for a moment. "There's a path forward." She waited. "A joint medical integration program," he said. "Official, documented. You operate under Navy oversight while maintaining your civilian position." Dr. Trent looked uncomfortable. "That would still expose us." Hayes turned to him. "It would protect you." Claire shook her head slowly. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Hayes agreed, "but it found you anyway." The meeting ended without resolution. Claire left the room feeling the weight settle deeper into her bones. There was no immediate threat, no arrest, no suspension, just something worse. Inevitability. That evening, she didn't go home. She drove back to the riding field. The sun was low, painting the sky in muted gold and gray. Atlas stood near the fence, massive and still, his bay coat catching the light. He lifted his head when he saw her, ears flicking forward. Claire rested against the fence, exhaling slowly. "You'd think I'd learn," she murmured. Atlas stepped closer, pressing his muzzle against the wood. 12 years old, scarred, still standing. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn this time. Jack Rowe stopped beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. He looked tired, but resolute. "They cornered you," he said. "They tried." Jack glanced at Atlas. "You always come here when you're thinking." "Animals don't care who you were," Claire said. "Only who you are." Jack nodded. "Command wants you visible," Claire scoffed softly. "They always do." Jack hesitated. "There's something else." That got her attention. "Mason Cole's wife reached out," Jack said. "He's recovering well. She wanted to thank you." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," Jack said, "but she said something interesting." Claire waited. "She said Mason hasn't slept through the night since his last deployment. Except the night after you treated him." Claire swallowed. "He said he felt safe," Jack continued, "like someone who understood what it cost to keep him alive." The words landed heavier than any accusation. Jack turned to face her. "You don't just fix bodies, you stabilize people." Claire opened her eyes. "That's dangerous." "Yes," Jack agreed, "but it's also rare." They stood in silence as the sun dipped lower. "I don't want to be a symbol," Claire said finally. "I don't want to be used," Jack nodded. "Then don't disappear again." She looked at him sharply. "That's your advice?" "That's my warning," he replied. "If you vanish now, they'll chase your shadow forever. If you stand still, you control the terms." Claire watched Atlas shift his weight, steady despite the old injury in his leg. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly. Jack's voice was gentle. "Then you'll fail doing what you were meant to do." Not hiding from it, Claire let out a slow breath. That night, alone in her apartment, she took the photograph from the shelf and turned it face up. It showed a younger Claire, standing beside a medical tent, sunlight in her eyes, a smile she hadn't worn in years. She stared at it for a long time. Silence had protected her once. Now it was breaking. Claire Monroe slept for 3 hours. It was the deepest sleep she had known in weeks, heavy and dreamless, the kind that came only after the mind had exhausted every possible argument with itself. When she woke, morning light cut across the apartment floor in long, pale stripes. The ocean beyond her window was calm, indifferent, as if it had never known storms. She sat up slowly, feeling the quiet weight of a decision that had already been made somewhere beneath conscious thought. At 9 a.m., she stood once more in the same windowless conference room. This time, she was not alone. Jack Rowe sat to her right, posture steady, eyes alert. Captain Robert Hayes stood near the wall, hands clasped behind his back, watching her with measured patience. Across the table sat Linda Carver and Dr. Michael Trent, their expressions carefully neutral, legal pads and folders aligned with precise intent. Claire placed her hands flat on the table. "I'll speak first," she said. Linda blinked, surprised, then nodded. Claire took a breath. Her voice was calm, even, carrying no trace of defiance or apology. "I will not operate in secrecy. I will not be hidden, and I will not be used." Silence followed. "I am willing," Claire continued, "to participate in a formal medical integration program, provided 3 conditions are met." Hayes's brow lifted slightly. "Go on." "First," Claire said, "full transparency, every operation documented, no unofficial deployments, no ambiguity." Linda made a note. "Second," Claire continued, "my civilian role remains intact. I choose when I step into military medicine, and I step back out when I say so." Dr. Trent shifted uncomfortably. "And third," Claire said, meeting Hayes's gaze directly, "I retain the right to refuse any mission that compromises patienture, ethical standards, or my own safety." The room was silent again. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Those terms are acceptable." Dr. Trent's head snapped up. "Captain, this protects the hospital," Hayes said calmly, "and it protects her." Linda closed her folder. "We'll draft the agreement." Claire exhaled slowly. The tension in her shoulders eased. Not gone, but manageable. When the meeting ended, Jack walked beside her into the hallway. "You did that without flinching." Claire gave a small smile. "I've had practice." 2 days later, Claire stood in a sunlit training facility just outside the city, the smell of dust and metal mixing with the sharp tang of antiseptic. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't a battlefield. It was something in between. A group of medics waited inside. Some were young, barely out of training, eyes bright with anticipation. Others carried themselves with the quiet weariness of experience. They looked at Claire with curiosity, respect, and something close to relief. Captain Hayes addressed them briefly. "This is Dr. Claire Monroe. You listen to her. You learn from her. You do not question her authority in medical matters." Then he stepped aside. Claire took a breath and began. She didn't lecture, she demonstrated. Hands-on instruction, real scenarios, no theatrics, no mythology, just the reality of stabilizing lives when perfection was impossible and time was cruel. In the corner of the room lay a familiar shape, Echo. The Belgian Malinois rested on his side, tongue lolling slightly, ears flicking at every sound. He had been cleared to accompany Luke Brennan during recovery training, and Luke stood nearby, still moving carefully but very much alive. Echo was 3 years old, all lean muscle and sharp intelligence, his coat flawless, eyes alert. When Claire knelt to adjust equipment, he rose and padded closer, sniffing her sleeve before settling beside her boot. Luke noticed. "Guess he remembers you." Claire glanced down, surprised by the warmth that spread through her chest. "Animals remember who didn't hurt them," Luke smiled. "So do people." Later that afternoon, Claire stepped outside for air. The training grounds stretched wide and open, a stark contrast to the tight corridors she'd known for so long. At the far edge of the field stood a chestnut horse, tall and powerfully built, his mane untrimmed, coat dulled by age, but eyes bright with awareness. "That's Red," Jack said, coming to stand beside her. 14, retired from mounted patrol, bad leg. Red lifted his head when he noticed them, ears turning forward. He walked closer, favoring his left hind leg, but steady nonetheless. Claire approached slowly. The horse huffed softly, breath warm against her hand as she rested it briefly against his neck. "He's still here," she murmured. Jack nodded. "They don't discard what still has value." That evening, Claire returned to the riding field one last time. Atlas was waiting. The old bay horse lifted his head as she approached, stepping closer with the familiar, unhurried grace of something that had learned patience the hard way. 12 years old, scarred, still strong, Claire leaned into the fence, resting her forehead against the wood. "I won't be coming as often," she told him quietly. Atlas breathed out, deep and steady. "I think you understand." She stayed until the light faded. A week later, Pacific Crest Medical Center felt different, not quieter, not gentler, just honest. Claire walked the halls without lowering her gaze. Staff nodded, some with newfound respect, others with cautious curiosity. Sarah Donnelly caught her near the nurse's station and squeezed her arm. "You look lighter," Sarah said. "I feel anchored," Claire replied. That afternoon, Mason Cole walked out of the hospital on his own 2 feet. He was thinner than before, his beard neatly trimmed, eyes softer than the man Claire had first treated. His wife stood beside him, gripping his hand as if afraid he might disappear. Mason stopped when he saw Claire. "I don't know how to say thank you," he said. Claire shook her head gently. "You don't need to." Mason smiled. "Still going to?" He reached down, and a golden retriever puppy bounded forward, clumsy and enthusiastic. "Meet June," Mason said. 8 months. She's the reason I get up and walk every day." June wagged her tail furiously, nose cold and curious against Claire's fingers. Claire laughed softly. That night, she sat in her apartment, the photograph still resting on the shelf. She didn't turn it face down. She didn't need to. Claire Monroe was no longer hiding. She was no longer running. She had drawn her line, and for the first time in a very long while, she intended to hold it. In the end, this story was never just about a hospital, a soldier, or a woman who stepped back into the light. It was about the quiet miracles we rarely notice, the ones that don't arrive with thunder, but with steady hands, stubborn compassion, and courage that whispers instead of shouts. Some people call it coincidence, others call it fate, but many of us believe those moments are gentle reminders from God, that even when we feel forgotten, unseen, or broken by life, His grace still moves through ordinary people, in ordinary places, at exactly the moment it's needed most. In our daily lives, we may not save lives in operating rooms or battlefields, but we all face moments where someone near us is hurting, afraid, or alone. A kind word, a patient heart, or simply staying when it would be easier to walk away. Those are the quiet miracles we are called to be. If this story touched you, let it remind you that second chances are real, that hope can return even after long silence, and that no one, no child, no animal, no weary soul, is ever truly alone under God's watch. If this message gave you comfort or strength, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and restore faith, subscribe to the channel so we can walk this journey together. May God bless you, protect you, and bring peace to your home. May He watch over you and those you love, today and always.